hello, everyone. Welcome to Kansas City's global community radio station. You're tuned in to Purpose, Passion, and Power with Jessica Lynn, and I am so excited to be at the power table. Woohoo! I am just overflowing today. I'm telling you the truth. There's so much coming your way, but I want to take baby steps and go through the preliminaries first. I want to share some exciting news that's been happening in the community and things that are going to be happening in the community. And then we're going to get right to our powerhouse guest. Let me tell you, I am excited. I have the powerful Lisa Benson here with me. I have Nicole Jacobs Sylvie here with me. Listen, if you don't hear anything else today, you need to hear this show. Let me share with you what's been going on in the community. Yesterday was a powerful day of giving. I want to give a big shout out to Pastor Darren Edwards, who is the senior pastor of United Believers Community Church, Fellowship Church, as well as Garments of Praise and Giving Hope and Help. We collaborated together to give out thousands of brand new clothing with the tags still on them. And that was from Garments of Praise, and shoes with the tags still on them. So when the people came, they were able to register and receive masks and feminine products from Giving Hope and Help. We gave out 4,785 period products. Amen. Amen. And I like to say that these are, yes, you can say that again. Period products are essential. They are essential, especially at a time such as this. So they were able to get these items. And let me tell you, one lady, she said, "You just don't know what this means to me." And she saw a particular kind, because we had like all the different kinds there, right? And we were packing them in bags. And she said, "Can I have this kind?" And she says, "I'm not trying to be picky, and I appreciate what you're doing, but I know what kind I like, and these are them." And I said, "Absolutely, absolutely, you can have that kind." And she registered on our sign-up sheet, and she said, "What am I signing up for?" I said, "Well, we're just going to share with you some information about us via email and whatnot." She says, "Oh, that's great. I love what you're doing and everything." And one of the workers said, "You should give her a flyer," but she had already gone. So I went to find her as she was doing her shopping. And I said, "Ma'am, here's a flyer." And she said, "You really don't know what this means to me." And she proceeded to share a horrific family death that happened that morning. And she was there receiving needed items. And I shared it with Pastor Edwards that it's not about the pads. It's about the possibilities through prayer. Because she said, "I'm going to go over here for prayer." After you did all of your shopping, they had an area where you could pray with the counselors. And she says, "I'm going to go over here for prayer." And when I tell you, that was my moment. That was my moment for the day. I could have stood on my feet until midnight, because when you are doing something for people, you don't know their story. And this woman could have, I don't even know all the story, but what she shared was enough. And it was so moving for me. And I just want to thank the community for coming out. Mayor Lucas came out and greeted the people and took pictures and showed up. And it was just nice. It was just really, really nice. So many people gave donations. It was a big deal. And this is what we need to do. We need to do this beyond COVID. Right? We do this all the time, but it's more elevated now because of COVID, right? So but it needs to be a change, period. It needs to be all the time. We need to have these types of things going on. So speaking of all the time, next Saturday, Teach for America will be giving out backpacks, 400 as a matter of fact. Students have already registered. And so registration is closed. I do apologize, registration is closed. This is just an information talk here about this community event. And Giving Hope and Help will be filling those 400 backpacks with period products. It is my dream to have period products on the back to school list. It's a necessity and it's essential. So we will be filling those 400 backpacks next Saturday. And then the last Saturday of this month, I'm excited to share that Councilwoman, 5th District Raina Park Shaw, and Giving Hope and Help have partnered together, along with a lot of other community partners, to give out 2,000, I said 2,000 backpacks at Swope Park. We will also be giving out feminine products, of course, masks, computers, hotspots, a wealth of things. It's going to be amazing. Go to the Giving Hope and Help Facebook page or Councilwoman Raina Park Shaw Facebook page to find the details. That is going to be August 29th. Listen, if you have a child that is going to school or staying at home, they still need school supplies. And this is an opportunity to get it for free. I said free, Free. If you have any questions, you can always check us out, Giving Hope and Help on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're everywhere. Thank you for tuning in to our announcements. If you have any community announcements that you'd like to share, I'd be happy to share it as well. You're tuned in to Purpose, Passion, and Power. Now let's get to the power that's sitting at the table. We have Lisa Benson. Her Facebook page is Lisa Cooper.
I have Lisa Benson.
Lisa Benson.
Winning Truths, which is with my company, and then Lisa Benson Cooper, which is my full name.
Okay. So I'm going to give a semi-introduction because nobody can talk about her like her, about her, right? And we're going to do the same for Nicole because, you know, when you're a powerhouse, you got to get it right with the introductions, and I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to just read from her book. Her latest book is Anchored in Bias, Fired Over White Tears. And I'm going to read the bottom of it because this is a lot of information, but she'll be able to spit it out really easily and smoothly for you. Lisa Benson is a diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism consultant, speaker, author, and Emmy award-winning journalist. She has helped countless people understand unconscious biases and systemic racism. Lisa wants her knowledge and firsthand experiences to help others navigate systems, institutions, and organizations when it comes to race and institutionalized action. Wow. Lisa, who are you?
I think you pretty much covered it. I think that was it. I appreciate you inviting me on the show. I appreciate this conversation. But yeah, I do diversity, inclusion, anti-racism work, and I always include the anti-racism because that's a part of the conversation. We're just now getting to the place to where we're willing to talk about what we need to be fighting against versus just kind of sitting and getting, if you will. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we know we should invite people to the table. We know that we should invite people who don't look like us. But the idea of doing work to really combat the systems of oppression that are simply a part of the framework of who we are and the institutions in which we involve ourselves in, the institutions which we all belong to. And so that is a huge part of the work that I do. And again, that diversity and inclusion parts are really, really important. And that's a space in which a lot of corporations, a lot of nonprofits have always been a part of. And I'm very happy to do that work. In fact, some of the trainings that I do, the introduction is the unconscious bias, implicit bias space. But I look forward to doing the elevated space where we're talking about what we can do to really dismantle the systems of oppression that we were born into, some of us, and the systems of oppression that we participate in. And so that's what I do professionally. But I'm also, of course, a mother of 2 little brown boys.
Wow. Beautiful.
Precious. Yeah. So, and that's a part of the reason that I'm so motivated to do the work, because the more I learned over the last several years about my own implicit biases, unconscious biases, I understood why those biases, how they show up, where they came from, and how they really do project upon unsuspecting victims. And so some of those unsuspecting victims one day will be my 2 black sons. And so that's why I do this work. That's why I'm so passionate about doing this work, because I did not know I had unconscious biases until I did the work myself, which is kind of the beginning of even my study of my diversity and inclusion certification through Cornell University. That's where I kind of learned and unpacked that for myself. And so now that I get it and I understand it, I want to help other people gain that power and that knowledge, so they're not allowing their biases to be projected negatively upon other people. Because if it goes unchecked, it's going to happen. We're going to allow our biases to show up in spaces that we really don't want them to, and they're going to have a negative impact on other people. And so that's why I do the work that I do, and I'm blessed to be here, and I'm blessed to be able to do this.
Well, I am so thankful that you're here, and a key word that you said was knowledge. When you have the knowledge, it actually turns into power. And this show is knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. And in all the things that you should get a wisdom and understanding, which also equate to power. and your purpose and your passion equates to power. And we're going to come back to that in a minute.
Okay.
I want to introduce my other powerhouse at the table. She's been here a couple times before,
Yes.
and I'm so glad to have you back. So it's turning out that you're here annually,
I
right?
didn't even realize, but
Mhm.
I'm loving it. I'm happy every time I come here, and especially to join Lisa. This
Yeah.
is
So
wonderful.
happy to be here with you as well.
Yes. So she's here annually, and so it would be only fitting that you would consider being here annually or more.
Of course,
Absolutely.
of course.
Yeah,
We
we've
can
got
make
a
it
lot of
date.
things to talk about.
Yes.
1 hour won't hold it. But anyway, Nicole, I did not write down anything about you because I can just spit it out.
Oh, wow. I love it.
First of all, you are just a powerful woman, and personal to me, a good sister and friend. And I just appreciate you and what you represent. You're doing a lot, and I'm not going to ramble that off. I'm going to let you talk about it because I want you to expound on it. But you were recently on Channel 4 last week, and I was so excited to have you share about COVID in the classroom and what you're doing. Lisa has 2 brown little boys. I have a brown grown son and 2 brown grandsons, and you have a light brown baby boy, but he's still a brown baby boy.
That's right.
And we all have a commonality. We all want the same thing. And your, I should say, struggle and dedication to the community and to get knowledge out is commendable. And
Thank you.
I just thank you for that. Your philanthropic work and everything that you do. And you both have stories that we've talked offline, and I was just like, I thank God that happened to you, which sounds crazy, but I know if it did not happen to you, you wouldn't be at this table, and neither would I. So I just thank God for all of the struggles and the trials that have turned into awesome testimonies. So Nicole, Jacob, Sylvie, who are you?
Wow, that lead in. I mean,
You know, it's
only
hard
as
to beat
Jessica
that,
can
right?
do. I know. I'm so appreciative of you. And when I look around this table, I just think of all the power that is here, but the purpose, and you're right, the catalyst that got us here. And thank you for talking about the work I've done. I really don't look at it as this amazing work when you say it, and I'm not trying to have mock humility. I feel like, how could I not, when all the people who have poured into us and what all of our ancestors have done in the legacy, right? And so it's my grandparents' shoulders I stand on, and so many others. And I know we have Black women. We are not monolithic, but we have individual stories that form a collective narrative. And we each have different experiences, but I know that we share a voice united for what we want for our community, and especially our Black boys. I am the founder and owner of Connection Coach KC. And what I started with that organization, I intended to just be a coach, essentially, and has blossomed into so much more. Jessica had no intention or realization that this was going to be. You mentioned at the top of the hour access, and how we know as people from marginalized communities, we do not have the same access as those from predominantly white communities, right? From majority culture. And so what I wanted to do was help people build their networks intentionally. That's what it started. I wanted to make sure that Black people and other peoples of color had the opportunity to build their network intentionally and authentically. I didn't want to chase card or be a card handout person. I thought it's all about building relationships. So it started there, and what I didn't come to know and realize was that there are so many people on boards of directors and other leadership roles that those that access, those barriers were deeper than we could ever know. And it started with the question, who do you know? Like, I kept having people from majority culture, my white colleagues, say, who do you know in terms of opportunities? And it just didn't ring true to me. And I said, wait a minute. The reason we keep coming back to who do we know is because we still largely live in segregated communities. And the who do we know are the people that we trust and know and who live side by side with us, and we still don't have multicultural communities. And so that led into so much more. I've been doing some race and equity work for some time while during youth development. You can't work in education and not have that embedded. But I leaned into more intentionality because I just saw that we had talked about in Kansas City, and we know we're nice here, right? We want to talk about stuff, but we don't want to go deep.
But on Purpose, Passion, and Power, we want to uncover those things, and we want to talk about. This is real talk, because the thing of it is, we can't change what we deem as normal.
What we're not willing to address.
That as well.
Right.
Yes, and it is not normal for us not to have the equality.
That's right.
It has been our normal for way too long.
Yep.
And we have stepped up, and we're not going to accept it anymore. And what I love about it, Nicole and
That's
Lisa,
right.
is that we are stepping up, but we also have whites that are stepping up with us. We have our light-skinned sisters and brothers that are of Indian descent and of Mexican descent. And so I think it's just so awesome. This is a great point to say, black, brown, and white, we have to unite for change. And that's what I see happening across America. Can you speak to that?
I see the same thing. What I think has happened, and I really look to another movement. I was thinking about marriage equality, and I remarked and followed so much within the research of that it was when the Allies stood forward in a very intentional and vocal way that things changed. There were a lot of people who, for a variety of reasons, they were like, love who you love, and there were other people who were really strongly in favor of, but it wasn't until those advocates, those allies came forward and used their vote and used their voice did things change. So I said, wait a minute. And what I'm finding in this movement is that there have been so many friends of mine, colleagues, people I admire, that in a meeting they would see something happen that would be a microaggression or be out and out racist. They were in horror in the meeting, stayed silent, and then caught me in the parking lot to tell me how much.
I'm so sorry they are.
I'm so sorry. Right? It was all those behind
Raise your hand if that's happened to you.
Okay, every person behind the scenes. And you know what? At those times, I'm complicit, because in those times when that happened, I was like, thank goodness you saw that too. But I didn't say, why didn't you say something?
There you go.
Yes.
Until
There you go.
recently, right?
Right.
Because that was good enough. Because I was so used to silence that any little thing made me feel like,
I'm making some headway if somebody's
Right.
going to say they noticed
Right.
it too.
and I know Jessica and I are of similar generation. Lisa is younger than us, but when I think of the X-Gens, I think
That is so awesome.
I know.
I don't know if it's actually true, but we'll
I
check
think so.
after.
I only know because I was at your birthday party, so that's the only reason. Because y'all looks fabulous. But I think about what we did, and I've talked about this with pain and some just evaluation. We've said things were good enough, and we probably kept teeth marks that you could see across our tongue from how many times we bit our tongue because we wanted to
Grit
get
our
that,
teeth.
grit that teeth, get that good job, and not only get that good job, but retain in that good job.
Yeah.
And I know Lisa can speak to that. But we did that. So we took what we thought was okay at the time, but allowed this behavior to persist. So I've been looking at that during this time and looking at myself.
And I love it. I love it. And I want to talk about, that's a great segue for Lisa to talk about
Yes.
her Anchored in Bias, the book or the story. What I have found in the book is that your story is our story.
Yes.
And so I thank you and I honor you, like for real,
Oh, thank you.
for sharing your story. Because when you and I talked offline, you said something to me, and I don't know if you remember saying it, but you said it's all of our story.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it is. So let's talk about
Yeah, the
that.
reason I wrote the book was because as I was walking through this journey, I learned so much, and I learned so much about myself because I was the go along to get along type chick. Okay, I was going to work every day, and
Yep.
things wouldn't sit right, they didn't feel right, and I wanted to say something, but there's always this feeling of, oh, I don't want to say too much, I don't want to get in trouble.
right.
The psychological safety that's necessary to really bring forth change in an organization was absolutely not there at my former employer. And so you basically just show up every day, you do your job, and I was able to do my job well enough to stay employed. But the idea of trying to challenge systemic oppression in that space, the idea of trying to challenge the status quo was not something that I felt free to do, and so I didn't do it. But either, regardless of all of that, my end was my end. What happened to me still happened to me. The reality of me sharing that article still led to my suspension and my ultimate termination, even as I'm kind of going along to get along. And even after I went through the federally protected right of filing a discrimination lawsuit and filing a grievance in a lawsuit. So all the things that I did that were my legal right to do, when I did those things, there was still an aftermath. There was still a retaliation for those things. But the learning curve I was on and trying to understand what was going on, because I was very careful, because what you end up doing in that space of learning how to go along to get along is perfect assimilation. You learn how to assimilate to the majority culture. You know how to talk, you know how to walk, you know how to show up at their house, you go to the baby showers, you learn how to be accepted into this space. And so since I'd done that for so long and so well, I was still a little surprised that my coworkers were so offended by this article. that it would ultimately cost me my career, my livelihood, my job. And so me learning this and getting this, there were so many like aha moments along the way that I knew they were not my own. I knew these were conversations that once I got on the other side of the line, when I was in spaces where people were talking about systemic oppression, when they were talking about internalized racial oppression or inferiority, internalized racial superiority, all those things I'd never heard of. But once I got into the spaces where people were talking about it, I knew I wanted to stay there, and I knew I wanted to get that information and carry it back to the other side of the line. I wanted to get to the place where I'm helping to normalize these conversations in such a way to where it does not have to cost someone what it costs me for you to understand what's happening to you, and then to understand what's on the other side of that. Because I believe I'm blessed and highly favored. I'm thankful for the space I'm in. I'm thankful to be an entrepreneur and a small business owner, but I did not put that on the line. What was put on the line, what was taken from me, was taken from me based on my situation. And so part of my hope in people reading the book is understanding that, because we're not at a place yet to where we're willing to have these conversations and it not cost something. But I will say I was suspended in May of 2018 for sharing the White Tears article on my Facebook page.
On your personal Facebook
My personal
page.
Facebook page. I was suspended. Well, I was suspended in May of 2018 and subsequently fired for sharing it on my personal Facebook page. But in May of 2020, Amy Cooper was fired for trying to weaponize her white tears against Christian Cooper at the park in New York. And so I feel like we are making strides. We are absolutely moving this conversation forward in such a way that it is, to me, getting to Main Street, to where when you're talking about white tears, white fragility, when you're talking about systemic oppression, people don't necessarily immediately just get offended and cower down. Well, some people still do, and we still have work to do, but we've definitely moved. We've
moved the needle.
We have absolutely since even my lived experience. And so I'm grateful to be at a space to where we can have this conversation and people aren't personally offended, because again, we want to make racism into these personal acts, one person to another person. But when we look at racism from a systemic or institutional level, it honestly opens the conversation up in such a way to where it's not your personal fault, but it is your personal responsibility to do something. And
personal responsibility.
Exactly, your personal responsibility to do something about it, because we are all either benefactors or contributors to the system in which we all exist.
Which leads me to, and I would like you to comment on this. I'm getting it often, and I'm sure both of you are as well. Whites apologizing for their other white people being discriminatory, or I've shared things on social media, you've shared things on social media, and I'll get a comment, I am so embarrassed of our people, and I think that I know something's going through you right now, but I'm seeing that. And when you said benefactor, that makes me feel that they have been benefiting, even though they have not maybe done the actual racist act or lynching or whatever it may be, but they're apologizing. And there's something to that apology that they're feeling. I don't know what they're feeling, but it's an embarrassment, it's a disgust, it's a coming into the knowledge, I can't believe this happened. Because for so many years, if we shared certain things to our counterparts that we know in a workspace, well, no one would do that to you. Right. That couldn't be true. You have to be mistaken.
Right.
And so, see, now that we have the video, unfortunately, of George Floyd, who God used as a sacrificial lamb. And, you were a sacrificial lamb. We've all been a sacrificial lamb at some point. But was there a video that captured it? So the video captured this with George Floyd. Now, there's been many other videos, right, but there's never been one with the 9 minute and 84 3-second knee in the neck. And many years ago, Malcolm X made a statement in his speech. It's your knee in my neck. That's right. I can't get forward. I can't do this. We are just as smart, but we have to work just as hard. We have to prove. But yet our coworkers that know us by our first name and know how many children we have can't believe this is real until the sacrificial lamb video showed up. Am I getting somewhere with this?
Yes, it's so many feelings come up when you say this, really, Jessica, emotions. And just like we are not monolithic, nor are white people, but sometimes the apology is to ease their own guilt and shame. And so, and then there's others who are apologizing and saying, I'm apologizing for the pain that's happened to you, and I'm digging in and doing the work.
That's wonderful.
And I've seen differences. I've seen people who have said, this is what I'm trying to teach my children. Are these good resources? They didn't ask what resources should I use. They're just vetting them with me. So it depends on what those tears and that apology is about, because I've seen some people apologize to, I'm consoling them in the end. It feels like because they're crying so much.
Yes,
so it's
that happened to me too.
Doesn't it? And so,
Yes,
and
yes.
that's people who are, I want to assume good intention, but there's just
There's no work
They're
done.
beginning the journey.
They're just now seeing.
They're just beginning, right? There's just this. And then to have the video be the catalyst, and Lisa paved the way in our local community and nationally with what she experienced, but that it had to take a video so horrific to get action is utterly bittersweet.
It is utterly bittersweet, because the truth be
painful.
told, the history of what has happened to our people, and the suppression and the murders and the lynching, was very graphic
And well documented.
and well documented.
There's been
yes.
photos.
Yes.
Emmett Till.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
It's been, so it isn't as if there
They didn't
has
know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's as if it never happened.
Right.
So this
It's
is
kinda
Or
like
if-
sweep it
or
under the
as
rug.
if it does not really matter.
Matter.
So that's the part we have
Yes.
to negotiate. It's not like the knowing is not there, because people know. I think we've known. So the reality of us watching him die, literally watching the last breath leave
Right.
his body, was traumatic, and we felt a certain kind of way. And I agree. I think that's true for Black and brown people. No one, I mean, in real time, real life, real time. And so I think the part that ends up being the question mark as to whether or not this is a heartfelt, I'm sorry this is happening and I want to do something about it. I'm going to
Right.
use my power, my privilege, my influence to change life, whether that's in my school, what that's in my neighborhood, that's my company. And so the idea of feeling sorry or sad, you would feel the same way if you watched a dog die. I mean, have you ever hit a bird when you're driving down the street? That's traumatic to hit a bird.
I'm in pieces.
Me
I'm
too.
in stitches.
I'm like, I don't even want to keep going
Right.
because I can't believe I hit that bird. It was
Right.
unintentional.
Right.
And so the idea of people feeling a certain kind of way, to me, is just based in simple humanity, right?
Correct.
But doing something is a whole nother call. That's something
That's right.
completely different.
Take
And I think
courage.
that's where we have to get to. We have to get to the place where we are taking these uncomfortable feelings and we're actually doing something. And then there's got to be at a place to where we're expecting it, because I have gotten to the place from myself and my cross-racial relationships to where I'm expecting you to do something. Don't
Yes.
just call me up and tell me about how bad you
What
feel.
are we going to do about
Yeah,
it?
what are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And it doesn't have to be this huge global thing. It can be, but it can be just incremental things in your real life. What can you do to uplift the voice or amplify the voices of people of color? What can you do to make sure that the people of color, the children in your schools, are being considered? What can you do about the curriculum? There's so many areas. In fact, the fact that institutionalized racism shows up in every institution, that means we all have every opportunity to make an impact in this space. So it's like, so again, the way you feel, I get it. I think we all feel a certain kind of way, but the question is, so what are you going to do about it? In
What
fact, I
good
wanna
trouble
share
are
with
you going to
guys,
get into? Excuse me.
Please.
What good
Rob
trouble?
and D'Angelo, oh, I'm sorry, Rob and D'Angelo, when I first, this whole thing happened to me, I reached out to her. I was like reaching out to everyone for information. Her book was so powerful. And so once I reached out to her, she too sent me an email and she said, "Hi, Lisa, I am so sorry to hear of this ordeal. I can only imagine the impact. I am glad that you have turned to anti-racist education, and I hope my work can be helpful to you. But for what it is worth, on behalf of my fellow white people, I apologize."
And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
was going to read that, so I'm so glad you went to that.
So
This
that's
is
exactly the
Love that.
natural action.
Goosebumps.
But of course, we know she does the work.
She does the
absolutely-
work.
She
Obviously
does.
shows up in the space and she does the work.
She
but
leads.
that's what the next step has to be. So what are you going to do about it?
What
And you-
good trouble are you going to get into?
And you know what's such a part of that? When I heard Lisa talking about her story, I heard the risk that she was willing to take when she was no longer going to say that this was good enough. And what the issue was forced when someone looked at her personal email and then decided that that was a reason to be terminated. So this risk, and let it be said, you said at the top, Emmy award winning. So there was no question about performance. Let that be said, because I think that's worth noting. But to take a risk and put ourselves in these positions as we do all the time, it's time for our white counterparts to do the same.
Yes.
So when they have their privilege and they're scared to speak up, I think about all the risk we've taken.
Yes.
And really, we know the level of risk varies in so many ways, but the more privilege, the more influence and affluence, usually the less risk you're taking because you're at the top of the pile. So if they're unwilling to make the risk and thinking that we are doing this on a day-to-day basis in this risk analysis and deciding what we can do, and the reason our generation was so compliant was because we didn't want the situation to happen like happened to Lisa.
Exactly.
So the reason we were compliant was real fear. It
Real
wasn't
fear.
us just
It
being
was an actual
non-courageous.
fear that it still remains to this
It
day.
remains
to
It
this
still
day.
remains. Yes.
Yes, so I wanted to make sure I called that because it wasn't as if we're just cowering, and we're courageous people paving a way the best we could, and that's what it required at that time if we wanted to keep our jobs, and
Yes.
still does, to your point.
It still does, because
still
if you
does.
if you
Right.
speak up as a woman of color, a man of color, a teen of color, you are more than likely to lose your job if you stand up for yourself.
It'll
Yeah,
be
and I think
masked.
that you also have to speak to the power of white solidarity, because the reality of how white people move in power spaces it became very clear to me in my lived experience. My former coworkers who were my friends, I went to their baby showers, I danced at their weddings. They absolutely moved with a position of power, which means you remain isolated, okay? And that's also true for people of color,
Yes.
because I did not have the power to sign anyone's check, okay? I could not sign your paycheck, and they could. And so the truth is, you end up honestly feeling very isolated in this space, even though you're not isolated in your lived experiences. I still have emails from former coworkers who are people of color documenting, talking about their lived experience in the exact same newsroom. But when it came to talking about their lived experience and the weight that they would have to bear because of that conversation, they absolutely blocked me. They absolutely cut me off. And
Because they don't wanna lose
and
their
I don't
jobs.
blame them, right? And that's my evolution. I'm not even mad about
But
that.
how
but
can
that
you
is
solve
the
that,
truth.
Lisa? How can that has got to change?
That's because the transformation has to start from the top down. We can't expect, again, it's hard for the oppressed to liberate themselves. You've got to get to the
right.
place where the people in power are held to account. And that's what we have to get to. We have to get to the place where we have leadership, we have top level management making decisions about dismantling systemic racism within their organization, not the people at the bottom trying to figure out how to bend the ear of the decision makers. The truth is, it should not have been that. But the truth is,
right.
I had coworkers who were very, very committed to not aligning with me. In fact, I had some I could no longer even call on their work phones. We had the conversation like, do not call me on this phone anymore. And in fact, they would let me leave the building, and then they would call me later. We wouldn't even talk in the newsroom anymore because they were so committed to making sure they didn't seem as though they were aligning with me, because they knew that could cost them. And they were worried about them too having a, I guess, a bullseye on their back, if you will. And I understood that, because at this point I was already gone. So there's no way that I could compensate them for their salaries. And so to your question, it has to be a top-down approach. We have to get to the place where our decision makers and the people in power understand the weight that is on people who the livelihood is needed. So oftentimes it is easier just to kind of tuck your tail, go along to get along. And if that's what you want, and that's what you want in your organization, that's what you're going to have. But outside of that, if you want a place to where people feel like they can bring their authentic selves to work, they feel as though that they matter, they truly matter, then you have to create that psychological safety, and you have to be okay with someone pushing back and challenging the way you've always done business, in hopes of honestly bringing forth positive changes within the organization or within the company. And I do think we're at a place now where people are willing to at least engage that conversation, but I'm looking forward to the transformation taking place.
Yes, and I have
Top
to say,
down.
I've heard this story more than once, even in real time before we were even friends, and then as friends, hearing your lived experience, and then hearing this again today, and I'm still mad. So I know you don't have to be, because you're evolved and you've done so much work, and I'm so proud of you, and you inspire me. And you're right, you called into the space something that I have not done. I am mad at all the people I felt didn't have your back when they saw that happening, who didn't want to take that call. And I know all the reasons why. I know that's real talk, but it still upsets me, because I wonder what if, right? And that's not a path you should go down. But what if they didn't? What if they stood up and they too said, this is not okay, and there was critical mass? What would that have looked like? And I use your example, but what would that look like in many places where there have been people of color that could have linked arms? Would we all have been ousted at the same time? We don't know, because I haven't seen it happen. We're scared of that risk, right? But that's what I liked when you said we can't the oppressed, we can't call on them first
Exactly.
in this way.
To fight for their own liberation.
That
Right.
doesn't-
It's hard for the oppressed to fight for their own liberation. It has to be someone
Right.
in power. Because ironically,
That's
I
right.
did have a coworker who followed and filed a lawsuit as well, and the same outcome remained. The same thing happened. And so that's why, as much as like I said, I have no regrets, but
I
it has
know.
to be a top-down approach. We have to get to the place where people, when they have real lived experiences that they feel is like they've experienced discrimination, differential treatment, they can have those conversations, and instead of targeting the person who brings forth this conversation, there's a top-down approach of saying, let's have this conversation.
That's
Let's
right.
figure out what's going on here. And then they have the freedom to do that. But I honestly, for my former employer, I believe the same thing. I think the exact same thing. In fact, I know it. It happened to me. It happened to my other coworker, and that sent a very clear message within that organization as to who will and will not be accepted or received in this space, and what is and is not acceptable behavior, despite the realities of federal law in this country.
Well, it's like
You're right.
when slavery was abolished, you still needed to carry that piece of paper that said that you were free. Okay. And once you presented that piece of paper, it didn't really change anything. You really weren't
Right.
free. You still risked.
Didn't have rights.
You still risked all of the possibilities of being killed, and you may have been let go, but you may have been told, you're not supposed to be out here after a such and such time. So it's like that mentality, and it's the same mentality as a black person seeing that happen to another black person, but they are not going to step up because they know the repercussions.
Right.
Yes.
So what this is this is modern day slavery.
Right.
This is modern day lynchings that we're experiencing. And to me, the parallels are so clear. They're very clear. And if you have not watched the movie Rosewood, I have a list of I've literally written down a list of 100 movies and documentaries that should be watched, but Rosewood is on the list. And I have literally watched the movies, that movie probably 50 times. And I even know some of the lines by heart. But everything that's happening now, if you watch that movie, it's just crazy. And that's a true story. A true story. Like you said, it has to change from the top down.
And so speaking about that, a lot of the work that I'm doing, and I know Lisa does too, as do you, is how do we have more people of color have access to those key tables where the decisions are made? Because that's what happens. When COVID hit, the first thing I thought of was, oh no, these organizations, schools, in all different types of institutions, hospitals, all different, are making decisions on behalf of communities, and they don't have representation at many of these tables. And so again, if I'm just going to assume good intention, just understanding and knowing what those barriers are and those obstacles, but truly understanding and not looking through a filter that's centered in whiteness, and that is this lens that we look at it's usually white middle-class Christian.
And they
If
have
I'm
no
being
idea.
honest, right?
They have no idea.
We know that. And so the decisions that are being made, so that has just lit a fire under me even more to how do we not only have people in the room but at the table, because I speak to that. There's times where I've had somebody, those gatekeepers, the key openers, and they may have paved a way so that I could join a board table or an organization, but I felt like the door was cracked and I had to pry myself in, and I was standing in the back of the room in the corner.
And you were the only
And you,
one.
and you should be happy to be there, because at least
Right.
you're in the room.
Right.
Right.
Well,
And then if
right.
I crawled and got my way to the table, I wasn't heard or validated or affirmed.
Because you should be happy to be there. At least you're at the
Happy
table.
to be there.
At
You
least
guys,
you're
the
at the
parallel,
table.
the
We should
parallel
just
with this
take-
in history is crazy,
We should
but
just
it's true.
take scraps, right?
Right.
And so at the same time, I'm thinking of when should I speak? What should I do? And then how can I get other people? And that hasn't been good enough. That's
No.
why in 20 years, the not-for-profit sector has hardly shifted. I started talking about being Kansas City nice. We've hardly shifted in 20 years in our board development. There's still a majority of boards that don't even have one person of color. And then if they do have a person of color, the socioeconomic and the education variances are not within the board at all.
And
So
the
that-
difficulty of a black nonprofit to get funding.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
I mean,
I know about that.
yes, we've talked about that so much because the very funders who are in philanthropy, their boards are all white or their staff is all white. So that lens and that access is so crucial. And we are not going to change things from the top down unless we have greater representation.
Well,
right?
that is key that I want to talk about. We're seeing a lot of companies on commercials and they're in magazines. We support the Black Lives Matter movement, right?
Right.
Great, wonderful. That's nice to be said. But who's on your board?
Yeah, right.
How many people of color sit at the executive table? That's what I want to know. I want that to be disclosed. Anybody can say Black Lives Matter because you don't want your sales to go down, right? Let's say that Black Lives Matter. Well, I don't care. Let's just say it so we can continue to get the black dollar. And we know that the black dollar and consumption of black people in America is about 13%.
Right.
So let's say Black Lives Matter, but I need to see the work that these companies are doing. And so what I am doing in my household is I told my husband, you know, we like to go out to eat to nice places. And I said, honey, I want to go to some place that's we haven't been, that's black owned. Now we can go to black owned restaurants, but I want to go to one I've never been to.
Right.
We need to do that more often. And we have done that, and we have found a wonderful breakfast and lunch place in Raytown, and we love it. And we're excited about breakfast and lunch lovers in Raytown. The food is great. The music is great. If you like the Temptations and Marvin Gaye, you're going to get in there and groove while you eat. I mean, you know, so shout out to breakfast and lunch lovers in Raytown, Missouri. But there's many. There's many different places that we can spend our black dollar at.
And being intentional about it, because that's something that on this side of my lived experience as an entrepreneur and business owner, I'm very mindful of, but I was not that mindful of prior to learning this, you know, being very intentional about how we spend our money, where we spend our money, holding people accountable to better service, good service, to be mindful of the, again, black lived experiences. So that's something I think that absolutely matters, that I don't know if you know, a lot of people realize the impact that we can make by our dollars. Because what I would say, even with my experience and my former coworkers' experience, is the lawsuit did generate change. It did. By the time they have to pay all those attorneys, I mean, it wasn't my, you know, it wasn't my come up. It wasn't really his come up. It was the attorney's come up, truth be told. If you did line for line, who made off the biggest from those lawsuits were the attorneys, defense attorneys, hands down. Okay.
But the principal made so much.
Well, the bottom line is they had to pay them anyway. They had to pay the millions to the defense attorneys too, and then they had to pay us. But the bottom line is we had to hit them where it mattered, and that was also, remember a few years back we had the students at Mizzou who staged the protest.
Yes.
You remember all that?
Yes.
The bottom line. Remember when, as long as the kid, I can't remember his name, but he was the whole starvation to where he was going to have the protest. He was going to have
That's right.
Yeah, he wasn't going to eat. But it wasn't until the football team got behind it, and then all of a sudden the football team said they were going to play. They were not going to play, which impacted what? The money. It hit them in their pockets.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden there was action. Now all of a sudden there was a need to respond.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, I still think that's where it has to matter, and that's why the black dollar does matter.
Absolutely.
When we get to the place where like we're not going to patronize your business, we're not going to spend our money here, then they will listen. That's when you can come in with your demands, because outside of there being an impact, it will be, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Tis tis.
There you go.
right.
Yes.
And while you're talking about Mizzou, I'm an HBCU grad, and I always love to have an opportunity to shout out to HBCUs. Southern University, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Clark,
Home.
Atlanta.
Hey, but HBCU love all day long. Listen, I think it's important. I think it's important for us to educate our children about the importance, the heritage, the legacy, the life-changing efforts and things that HBCUs offer, built by us and for us. 5 years of my life, I never experienced racism, just 5. And those 5 was when I was physically on an HBCU campus. 2 campuses. My first one was Texas College in Tyler, Texas, and then I transferred to Southern. 5 years in my life, I never experienced racism. And when I stepped foot off the campus, yes, but not on the campus.
Okay.
My professors were for me. They were my mom. They were my dad. Literally. You see what I'm saying? You can identify.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's something that you honestly take for granted when you're in these safe spaces, when you don't realize that
Because it's home.
Yeah, it's just you, and that should be life. Life should be a safe space, but we're still working towards that truth.
And so I encourage you, if you have high school seniors, and it's not even high school seniors, we need to start vetting them in first and second and third grade. They need to learn about HBCUs. If you look at people of power in America, Kamala Harris,
Yes.
HBCU grad,
That's right.
many judges, many business owners, big time people are HBCU grads. And I graduated from an HBCU and then went on to a PWI and experienced racism. Immediately, I had to fight to get grades changed when I had an A and they said it was a B. Why is my question? Why? And it's because of systemic racism.
That's right.
Right.
It's an institution, like you said in the beginning, and you can finish my sentence.
No, I agree. Mine was the opposite. I went to predominantly white high school. I actually was part of the DSEG program in St. Louis. So I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, get on the bus, and be bused all the way out to South County Lindbergh High School in St. Louis to be part of the DSEG program, which means I was still maybe 2 or 3 blacks in the classroom. But that was my comfort zone because I'm from Moberly, Missouri. But all that being said, so because we did have incidents of racism at Lindbergh at the time, and at the time I was in a journalism program at Mizzou, and I remember meeting a student there. That would have been when I was literally in high school, and she talked about how she was not getting the support she needed to try to find her first job. And I remember talking to her on campus when I would have been probably a sophomore or junior, and me thinking, I want to be somewhere where I'm going to be supported. And so that's what catapulted me into only looking at HBCUs when I decided to look for colleges. And so that's how I ended up at Clark Atlanta University. And I agree, because it feels like people are for you, they are with you, they want your success, whereas it was so easy being a part of, even being in high school, to just kind of be forgotten, you know, to kind of be categorized in such a way to where there's no trajectory for you. There's no plan, there's no plan for you. And that is just okay. It's expected to where if you're not, and honestly, it's like if you're one of the exceptional, and for us, it was the exceptional black kids were the athletes. They were the basketball players, football players. I don't even remember having an exceptional black colleague who was just smart. I was one of the smart ones, but there was still no hope. Like, you knew who the black smart kids were, but there was still no plan of Harvard. There was no plan of anything. There was just never a plan. There was just always, we were the smart ones and we were in the IB classes, but it was just part of the fray. But going to an HBCU, you absolutely had people plugged into you, paying attention, watching you move and challenging you. I'd always wanted to be a reporter, and I had advisors challenging me, like, you should get on the anchor desk. We need to see you here. You need to try this. And so I appreciated that. And then leaving an HBCU, going back into the world, it changes your expectation. It changes how you see the world you live in, because you go from an environment where you are supported back into a space to where it's almost like you were there to fill a space, not necessarily there's no plan for you. And so I absolutely think that was just true for me in all of my jobs. The whole idea of working twice as hard for twice as long, get half as far, was true. But I was able to move in all of my previous markets. It was only when I got here that no matter how hard I worked, it was like there was no chance of me moving up, and which is what led me obviously to the lawsuit. But the expectation of support absolutely came from me going to an HBCU. I expected to, at some point, someone to say, you know what, I see this in you, but that never happened. It's like, there is no trajectory, there's no plan of attack, there's nothing. That's like, where you are is where you'll be.
And can you imagine that for little brown boys?
Right.
The expectation at a very early age is not there. They're labeled as ADD and ADHD, and maybe they are because they're not being challenged. They're not being looked at. And you, as an educator, Nicole, I know that you can speak to that.
I think, yes, we've seen our black boys get labeled and kicked out of as early as preschool in disproportionate numbers. I mean, everything that you could think of that is a negative, they have indicated our black boys are at the top of those lists in terms of access, performance, all of these things. And when Lisa was talking, we share a history that's similar in that we both went to high school in St. Louis. I wasn't a part of the DSEG program because I lived in the county, but I was one of the brown faces in the school. And when you were talking, what resonates with me is that all of the black students were chronically underestimated. I think we have that shared experience, even though we had a different journey within that space, and that helped to shape where I am today with Rowan. What I did, and it's probably to an unhealthy level, and I think most Black mamas are this way, I watch his every milestone. I try not to obsess, but I look, because you can't work in education for years and look at the reading rates in third grade, or look at the levels of detentions, or who's getting in juvie, and not think, boy, those boys look just like my son, right? And so I think it's one of those where you know more, then you just are plugged in more, and that level of anxiety and weight,
Yes.
the weight that mamas hold,
Yes.
and I don't even realize it sometimes until I'll think I'm doing fine and that I'm calm and I'm just enjoying him until, and I wrote about this on Facebook, when in first grade he had a phenomenal teacher and he passed the third grade reading level, and I felt like it was the first time I exhaled. I didn't even know I was holding my breath.
Yes.
And I had real tears in my eyes. And
Yes.
while that is a great accomplishment and we should be happy, he was 2 grade levels ahead, the other white parents whose students read at the same level didn't seem to have that same joy the way I did, because he's going to a great school, he's getting
It's
a good
just
education.
normal progression.
Of course.
It's
Yeah.
expected.
It's
right.
expected, but for me, where we have been chronically underestimated, did I know that Rowan had every ability to do that? 100%.
Absolutely.
But I didn't know that anybody would see it. Or what if they did put him in a lower reading group like I was put in when I moved from the Bronx? I moved from the Bronx to Rochester, New York, and I was put in, come to find out later, the lowest reading group, the non-readers. And as little kids do, I was reading a book and I couldn't read in my head. I was reading out loud. And I remember the teacher saying, "You can read?"
Yeah.
And I
Like,
was like,
wow.
I was like, yes, I can. And I remember being moved into a different reading group. I can remember that vividly because I was underestimated then too. Because how could I, coming from the Bronx, be a student,
Have anything.
Just
have
assume that you were
anything,
not
just
able.
assume.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's playing in the back of my mind and my lived experience and how it lives out with my own child. And so I'm very intentional in choosing his education environments, and I
Yes.
vet them. I talk to other moms of color. Hey, how's it going over there? What do you think about this? How did that? I mean, constantly checking and vetting, but also being sure to simultaneously say, we come from a powerful and courageous people.
Yes.
When he sees these things that are on the media or such that show us in obstacles and pain, I say, but we have overcome.
Yes.
And look how far we've come in spite of. We talk a lot about that. And so he, Jessica specifically, he really embraces being a Black boy. Even though his presentation, he can present as white and people can, he doesn't pass himself, but others pass him. And Lisa and I have talked about that. So other people may mistake him as a white child when amongst other white children, but he strongly identifies as a Black child and that he comes from a courageous, proud, and brave people. He was talking about the Negro Leagues today. So that is what, but not every child, the intentionality with one child and how exhausting, even though I know it's necessary and I'd do it again, it is a weight. I don't want to say a burden,
because
a weight,
as
right?
Black moms, I feel like there's always
Wow.
a counterattack we're preparing. I felt the same way in choosing my son's school, and I also felt the same way in becoming a room mom. I felt the same way in making sure I was out in the diversity committee. I felt the same way in making sure I showed up to every parent-teacher conference and constantly challenging. And the sad thing is, it proves to be necessary. Okay?
It's very
I've
necessary.
Had to have those,
It does.
I've had to have those conversations, even in choosing the school district that I was comfortable with, making sure they had the diversity levels I was comfortable with. I still have had to sit in the principal's office and say, wait a minute, you said this, but this is actually true. And in fact, I was at a meeting the other day, and this is what I saw, and they have to answer me. And I'm going to sit there in my nice college-educated, respectful, well-spoken Black self, and I'm going to ask you these questions. I'm going to demand that you answer me because I'm going to hold you to account. But I'm lucky in that I have the time and resources to do that.
So
Okay,
selfless.
I get to do that. I get to sit here on your diversity committee. I get to ask the question of the head of schools. I get to do that. That is my privilege. But what about the Black moms out there
Who's
who
working
want
2
the
jobs?
same outcome, who don't get to do that?
Yes.
That
They
is
love
my
their
my
babies as much as
privilege.
us.
They do.
Right.
Yeah, they do. And
But
they
it's
can't do
necessary.
it.
I have not found, even in all the work that I did to make sure I got my son at the school I wanted him in. He has great diversity, which is part of the reason I wanted him in a very diverse school environment because of my experience at Lindbergh High School. But I did that, and I'm still having to show up and knock on the door and be like, wait a minute,
Right.
check this out. I need you guys to double check this. And why did you guys say this and this happened? And I'm happy with the school, and I'm continuing to work with the district to make sure that the outcomes are what I want them to be. But that is a work too. In fact, when they finally locked in on the first day of school this year, I cried. like, because we're back to online schooling. And, you know, for me, when I started online schooling at the end in March last semester, I mean, it was a full-time job,
Yes.
which means my business was kind of on hold. I was doing little projects, it was kind of on hold.
Yeah.
And so the reality of me trying to balance, you know, having a whole business and trying to online school my two boys, it's like, how am I going to lift this? How am I going to do both of these things well? And I'm not in a place where I want to stop working my business and moving my office to my company, but I also am not at a place where I question my priority in regards to my son's education. And I'm also not at a place where I believe that if I just let the district do what they do or the teachers do what they do, I'm going to get the outcomes that I need. And so all of these things combined means that I agree. There's this heaviness, this weight that's on our shoulders, but I feel like there's nothing to say that we don't have to carry it, because I think we still do.
Oh, I love every bit of that.
It is awesome. It is awesome. Everything that you said, and all I could think about the whole time is the mothers that have to work 2 and 3
Yes.
jobs, the
We
single
talked about
mothers,
that. Yes.
you know. And I want to say that there are many single mothers that have raised phenomenal children.
Yes.
Look at the blacks and browns that are doing great things across the country, locally and nationally and globally. Many have been raised by single moms, some by single black dads.
Right.
That is not acknowledged as much as it should be
Right.
regarding single black moms or single black dads. But I think it's paramount. It is paramount that what you put in your child at home, at the table, can take them so far. Even with you working your 2 jobs, even with you not being at the PTA, even when the teacher doesn't think you're involved and you're struggling trying to keep bread on the table, you have put single mothers, this is for you, you have put everything in your child. Everything that Nicole has put,
That's right.
everything that Lisa has put, everything that I have put. We've put our children in private schools. We've done the extra things that cost more money. We've done all of that. But there are mothers who could not do that. And their children yet prevailed. And I think that speaks to the DNA in us. How can a people be put on a boat and survive without water, without food, without speaking to another person that has the same language laying next to them, with bowel and regurgitation all over them, raped, sodomized, everything. Many of our ancestors are at the bottom of that sea, disintegrated by now. But the DNA is in Lisa. You win because of that DNA. It's in Jessica. And it's in Nicole. And guess what? It's in our children. It's in our great, great, great grandmother who laid on the floor of the Mayflower, asking God to make a way for you and me. It's in our great, great, great grandmother who was picking cotton. It's in the great, great, great grandmother and grandfather who fought just to be obedient.
Right.
That is so true.
Oh,
We are a strong people.
we are.
We are a strong people.
I agree.
And we will not die in vain. George will not die in vain. All of those before him, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of those. They say, oh, his own people killed him, Malcolm X. That's part of what we're talking about. That's part of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Know your history, people. Wow. We're literally out of time.
This was so good.
So good.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you for having
This is so
Oh,
good. We
wow.
have to do this
We
again.
do.
Would love
And this is just, people need to hear your story, and they need to hear your story. And when you said St. Louis, and I thought of you with St. Louis, and I have another girlfriend, Angela Brown, who went to
yeah.
school and experienced these types of things that you all did in St. Louis. And there's girls here that experience it right now at St. Teresa and other
right.
private schools. And my daughter herself has a story going to private Christian school, and my son as well. And so, wow, that's all I can say is we prevail.
That's right.
I
And
agree.
winning truths. You said we win.
We
Winning
win.
truths with
We
Lisa's
win.
book.
Winning
We
truths.
win. Anchored in bias, fired over white tears. Where can they get this book?
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You can order it online or call me.
Call her.
That's right.
She's everywhere. I'm Jessica McClellan. I am honored and truly blessed to have my dear friend Nicole, my dear friend Lisa with us today. You've been tuned in to Purpose, Passion, and Power on Kansas City's global community radio station, KUAW. Be blessed.
Thank you.